The night was a beast, clawing at the windows of Karoline Leavitt's sprawling New Mexico mansion with gusts of desert wind that howled like a warning. Inside, the chandeliers flickered, casting golden light across marble floors and walls adorned with paintings of forgotten saints. Karoline, a woman in her late 40s with eyes that held both fire and sorrow, stood at the edge of her grand staircase, her silhouette small against the vastness of her home. She wasn't alone, not tonight. Outside, in the shadows of the mesquite trees, a Mexican cartel's enforcers crept closer, their boots crunching softly on the gravel, their whispers drowned by the storm. They thought they were hunting a prize, the reclusive philanthropist whose wealth, they believed, was ripe for the taking. They were wrong. By dawn, they would learn that Karoline Leavitt's true fortune wasn't in her bank accounts or her mansion, it was in her heart, and that was a force no weapon could conquer. Karoline had never been one for ostentation, though her mansion suggested otherwise. The estate, perched on a hill overlooking the moonlit desert, was a relic of her late husband's ambitions, a monument to a life she no longer lived. She had kept it not for pride but for purpose. Beneath its opulent facade, the mansion was a sanctuary, a haven for those the world had cast aside. Orphans, refugees, and broken souls found refuge in its hidden rooms, where Karoline offered not just shelter but hope. She had no children of her own, no family to call hers, but she had built a family from the fragments of others' lives. Tonight, as the cartel's leader, Mateo Vargas, scouted the perimeter with his men, he saw only a target. He didn't know that Karoline's mansion was more fortress than prize, guarded not by guns but by the fierce love of those she had saved. Mateo, a man hardened by years of violence, had heard the rumors about Karoline Leavitt. They called her La Madrina, the godmother. Not out of fear but reverence, though he mistook it for weakness. His intel was clear, a lone woman, no security detail, a fortune in cash and jewels supposedly stashed in her vaults. His cartel, bleeding from recent turf wars, needed a win, and Karoline's isolated estate seemed an easy mark. As his men cut through the perimeter fence, Mateo's pulse quickened. He imagined the headlines, a clean raid, a quick getaway, and enough loot to fund their operations for years. He didn't notice the small figures watching from the mansion's upper windows, children, their eyes wide with fear but steady with trust. They knew Karoline. They knew she'd protect them. Inside, Karoline was already moving. She'd been tipped off hours earlier by Miguel, a former cartel runner who'd found redemption under her roof. He'd overheard whispers of the raid in a border town cantina and raced to warn her. Now, as the clock struck midnight, Karoline gathered her makeshift family in the mansion's hidden basement, a labyrinth of rooms designed for emergencies like this. There were 20 of them, children as young as 5, teenagers hardened by life on the streets, and a few adults who'd escaped lives of crime or despair. "Stay quiet," Karoline whispered, her voice calm but firm. "No matter what happens, you are my heart, and I will keep you safe." Her words weren't just a promise, they were a vow, etched into her soul by years of loss and love. The basement was stocked with supplies, food, water, blankets, but Karoline's plan wasn't to hide forever. She'd faced threats before, not from cartels but from a world that doubted her mission. After her husband's death in a car accident a decade ago, she'd inherited his wealth and his enemies. She could have fled, started anew, but Karoline chose to stay. She'd turned the mansion into a beacon, funding schools, clinics, and shelters across the Southwest, all while taking in those who had nowhere else to go. Her kindness wasn't blind, it was deliberate, a rebellion against a world that thrived on cruelty. As she locked the basement door, she heard the first crash upstairs, glass shattering, boots stomping. The cartel was inside. Mateo's men moved like wolves, swift and silent, their rifles glinting in the dim light. They expected resistance, maybe a guard or two, but found only empty halls. Mateo's frustration grew. "Find her," he barked, his voice echoing through the atrium. His second-in-command, Javier, a young man with a scar across his cheek and a flicker of doubt in his eyes, hesitated. He'd heard stories about La Madrina, tales of a woman who turned gangsters into guardians, who fed the hungry and clothed the poor. Javier had joined the cartel out of desperation, not devotion, and something about this raid felt wrong. But Mateo's glare silenced his doubts, and Javier followed orders, kicking open doors, searching for the vault. Upstairs, Karoline slipped through a hidden passage, her heart pounding but her mind clear. She wasn't armed, she'd never owned a gun, but she carried something more powerful, knowledge of her home and the trust of those within it. She reached the control room, a small space hidden behind a bookshelf, and activated the mansion's silent alarms. Not police, she didn't trust them to arrive in time, but a signal to her network of allies, former residents who'd gone on to build lives but never forgot her. She also triggered the mansion's defenses, steel shutters on the windows, reinforced doors that locked automatically. The cartel wasn't just raiding a house, they were stepping into a trap of their own making. As the shutters slammed down, Mateo cursed. "She's here," he snarled, realizing they'd underestimated their target. His men fanned out, tearing through rooms, smashing vases, ripping paintings from walls. But Karoline was one step ahead. She used the mansion's intercom system, her voice echoing through the halls like a ghost. "You came for wealth," she said, her tone steady but laced with sorrow. "But you'll find something else. Leave now, and no one gets hurt." Mateo laughed, mistaking her words for a bluff. He didn't know that Karoline's plea wasn't for her safety but for theirs. She'd seen what violence did to souls, and she wanted no more blood on her hands, or theirs. In the basement, the children clung to each other, their whispers a mix of fear and faith. Maria, a 12-year-old girl who'd escaped a trafficking ring, held the hand of little Diego, who'd been abandoned at a border crossing. "Will Karoline be okay?" Diego asked, his voice trembling. Maria squeezed his hand. "She's La Madrina. She's stronger than all of them." Maria's trust wasn't blind. It was born from the night Karoline had found her, starving and scared, and given her not just food but a future. Now, Maria prayed, not for herself, but for the woman who'd become her mother in every way that mattered. Back upstairs, Javier's unease grew. In one room, he found a wall covered in photos, not of wealth or power, but of smiling faces, children at school, families reunited, men and women in graduation caps. A note pinned to the wall read, "You are enough." Javier's hand shook as he held his rifle. He thought of his own sister, lost to the cartel's world, and wondered if she'd ever met someone like Karoline. When Mateo ordered him to burn the room, Javier hesitated. "Why are we doing this?" he asked, his voice low. Mateo's eyes narrowed. "Because we take what we want. Move." But Javier's feet stayed planted, a crack forming in his loyalty. Karoline watched from the control room, her heart aching. She saw Mateo's rage, Javier's doubt, the chaos unfolding. She could have stayed hidden, waited for her allies to arrive, but that wasn't who she was. She thought of her husband's last words, "Make the world kinder, Karoline." She'd spent a decade doing just that, and she wouldn't stop now, not even for men with guns. She stepped out of the passage, into the open, her hands raised. "I'm here," she called, her voice cutting through the storm's howl. The cartel froze, their weapons trained on her. Mateo smirked, thinking he'd won. "Where's the vault?" he demanded. Karoline smiled, soft and sad. "There is no vault. Everything I have is in this house, my family." Mateo's smirk faded. He expected fear, defiance, anything but this calm, unshakable woman. "You're lying," he growled, stepping closer. Karoline didn't flinch. "You came for money, but you're stealing from people who have nothing. Those jewels you want. Sold to build a school. The cash. It feeds children. You're not robbing me, you're robbing them." Her words hit Javier like a fist. He lowered his rifle, his scar burning as memories of his sister flooded back. Mateo shouted, "Search the house," but Javier's doubt spread to the others. They'd expected a fight, not a sermon. And Karoline wasn't done. She took a step forward, her eyes locked on Mateo's. "I know who you are," she said softly. "Not your name, but your pain. You think this is power, but it's chains. I've seen men like you, hurting because they're hurt. You can still choose differently." Mateo laughed, but it was hollow. Her words weren't just for him, they were for his men, for Javier, for the part of them that still remembered who they'd been before the cartel claimed them. Outside, headlights appeared, Karoline's allies, former residents now doctors, teachers, cops, racing to her aid. But the real battle was here, in this moment, between a woman armed with compassion and men armed with fear. Javier dropped his rifle. "She's right," he whispered. Mateo spun, his gun raised, but the others hesitated. The mansion, once a symbol of wealth, revealed its true purpose, a home for the lost, a light in the dark. Karoline's kindness wasn't weakness, it was a force that disarmed hearts. As Mateo's men wavered, the storm outside quieted, and the first rays of dawn broke through. The cartel had come for a raid but found a reckoning, one that would change them forever. The dawn light crept through the cracks in the mansion's steel shutters, painting slivers of gold across the tense standoff in Karoline Leavitt's grand atrium. Mateo Vargas, the cartel leader, stood with his gun trained on Karoline, his face a mask of fury and confusion. Around him, his men wavered, their rifles half lowered, caught in the gravity of Karoline's words. She stood unarmed, her hands still raised, her eyes holding a quiet strength that seemed to pull the air from the room. Javier, the young enforcer with a scar across his cheek, had dropped his weapon entirely, his gaze flickering between his boss and the woman they'd come to rob. Outside, the rumble of approaching vehicles, Karoline's allies, grew louder, but the real battle was here, in the space between hearts hardened by violence and the possibility of redemption. "You think you can talk your way out of this?" Mateo spat, stepping closer to Karoline. His voice was sharp, but there was a crack in it, a tremor of doubt. He'd built his life on fear, on taking what he wanted, but Karoline's calm defiance was something new, a force he didn't understand. "Tell me where the money is, or I burn this place down with everyone in it." His threat was meant to terrify, but Karoline's expression didn't change. Instead, she lowered her hands slowly, as if inviting him to see her not as a victim but as a mirror. "There's no money here, Mateo," she said, her voice soft but piercing. "Not the kind you're looking for. But there's something else, something you need more." She gestured to the walls, where photos of smiling faces, children, families, survivors, told a story of second chances. "These people were like you once. Lost. Angry. Trapped. I didn't give them gold, I gave them a reason to believe in themselves. You can have that too." Her words weren't just for Mateo but for every man in the room, each carrying their own scars, their own regrets. Javier's breath caught. He thought of his sister, Elena, who'd vanished into the cartel's world years ago. He'd joined Mateo's crew to find her, but all he'd found was more pain. Now, standing in this mansion-turned-sanctuary, he saw a different path. "She's telling the truth," Javier said, his voice trembling but firm. "I've seen what she does. The kids in town, the schools, she's not hiding wealth. She's giving it away." Mateo's eyes flashed with rage, and he swung his gun toward Javier. "You're weak," he snarled. But the other men didn't move to back him. Karoline's presence, her unshakable kindness, was unraveling their loyalty. Downstairs, in the hidden basement, the children and adults huddled together, listening to the muffled voices above. Maria, the 12-year-old who'd escaped a trafficking ring, clutched little Diego's hand. "What's happening?" Diego whispered, his eyes wide. Maria, who'd learned to trust Karoline's strength, whispered back, "She's fighting for us, like always. Not with guns, with her heart." The others nodded, their fear tempered by faith. They'd all been saved by Karoline's selflessness, and now they prayed for her to save herself, and maybe even the men upstairs. Karoline took another step toward Mateo, her voice steady. "I know what it's like to lose everything," she said. My husband died, my world crumbled, and I could have let it make me bitter. Instead, I chose to build something better. You can too. She pointed to a photo on the wall. A young man in a mechanic's uniform, smiling beside a car. That's Miguel. He used to run drugs for a cartel. Now he fixes cars and teaches kids to do the same. He was you, Mateo. So was I, in a way. We're all broken until we choose to heal. Mateo's hand shook, the gun still aimed at her chest. He wanted to pull the trigger, to silence this woman who made him feel small, but her words were like a tide, pulling at the foundations of his world. He thought of his mother, who'd prayed for him to escape this life before she died. He thought of the blood on his hands, the lives he'd taken, the emptiness that followed. You don't know me, he growled, but his voice broke, and for the first time, he looked afraid, not of Karoline, but of the truth she carried. Javier stepped forward, placing himself between Mateo and Karoline. Enough, he said, his scar glinting in the dawn light. She's not our enemy. We came here to take, but what if we're the ones who need to give? The other men murmured, their weapons lowering further. One of them, a grizzled veteran named Carlos, spoke up. I have a daughter out there. I don't even know if she's alive. This place, it's what I'd want for her. The room fell silent, the weight of their confessions heavier than any vault. Karoline seized the moment, her voice rising with quiet power. You came here to steal, but you can leave here changed. Not just for me, but for yourselves, for the people you've lost. Lay down your guns, and I'll help you start over. I've done it before, and I'll do it again. It was a promise, not a plea, a vow born from years of turning pain into purpose. She stepped closer to Mateo, unafraid, and held out her hand. Choose now, she said. Be more than this. Mateo's gun wavered, then fell to his side. His shoulders slumped, and for a moment, he was just a man, not a monster. Why? He whispered. Why would you help us? Karoline's eyes softened. Because someone helped me once. Because kindness is the only thing that lasts. Tears welled in Mateo's eyes, a sight his men had never seen. He dropped his gun, and it clattered on the marble floor, a sound that echoed like a surrender. The front doors burst open as Karoline's allies, former residents turned doctors, teachers, and community leaders, rushed in. They expected a fight, but what they found was a miracle, a cartel disarmed not by force but by compassion. Javier knelt, tears streaming down his face, and Karoline placed a hand on his shoulder. You're not alone anymore, she said. One by one, the others followed, laying down their weapons, their faces a mix of shame and hope. The children from the basement emerged, led by Maria, who ran to Karoline and hugged her tightly. I knew you'd save us, Maria whispered. In the days that followed, the mansion became a different kind of battlefield, one of redemption. Karoline worked tirelessly with her network to help Mateo's men. Javier enrolled in a carpentry program, vowing to find his sister and build a life she'd be proud of. Carlos reconnected with his daughter, who'd been living in a shelter Karoline had funded. Even Mateo, once a symbol of fear, began the slow journey of atonement, volunteering at a clinic Karoline had built. The cartel's raid, meant to destroy, had instead sparked a transformation that rippled across the desert, touching lives far beyond the mansion's walls. Karoline stood on her balcony one evening, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of hope. The mansion was quieter now, but its heart beat stronger. She thought of her husband, of the promise she'd kept to make the world kinder. The cartel had come for her wealth but left with something greater, a chance to be human again. And in that moment, Karoline knew that no amount of money could match the riches of a life spent giving. The world, she believed, could be changed one heart at a time, and hers would never stop trying. Moral of the story: Mexican cartel raids Karoline Leavitt's mansion, regrets it instantly. The moral of the story is that kindness and compassion are more powerful than violence or greed. Through selfless acts and unwavering belief in the potential for redemption, one person's heart can transform even the hardest of souls. proving that true wealth lies in giving hope and building a better world, one act of humanity at a time.